How do you review a technical paper? How many people have actually reviewed a technical paper? Have been asked to review a technical paper? 1, 2, at Madison. Anybody else?
I was asked to, but didn't.
Why didn't you do it?
Well, it was like I was like, like a 10th author on an article submitted to a journal, and they're like, like a few months later, we're like, hey, we want you to review a paper, and I was like, I'm not qualified.
I see. Okay. How many people have written a technical paper that's been in a journal or conference proceedings? So how have you received reviews? Were they useful? Kind of.
The reviewers in the article that I did were like they clearly had an agenda of their own, and they like harped on the same things, and outside of like their a couple times.
Okay. So the problem with this topic is it's incredibly boring. I mean, who really cares about this subject? So I'm going to ask you first, what do you think is important about reviewing a technical paper? What are the most important sections or aspects that you think should be covered in how to review a technical paper? I know that's a hard question to ask because it's rather vague, but what do you think? If you were giving this presentation, what would you cover?
I would say what's like the most time efficient way to get through. There's times where you're kind of flooded with papers. You're saying you might know.
Whoa, you got close to something there.
The speaker.
Yeah.
Oh, the speaker. Yeah, let's move the easel a little over. It got. There
Yes,
we go.
yes, yes.
I apologize.
Sorry.
I didn't expect that. There we go.
Okay, how to be time efficient, right?
Yeah.
Excellent question. What else? What else would you cover? If you were standing right where I am and you had to give some advice, what would it cover?
Also, like how to effectively go through the rabbit hole of references at the end of the paper. It's sort of relevant to this, but I don't know. Like as far as that's also something I kind of put on myself.
All right, I'll put references. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but we'll figure that out. What else? How to write useful comments? You already had a complaint about one of the reviews that you saw, that they had their own. What did you say?
It's a narrow focus.
Yes.
What they thought they wanted to comment about.
So something about get the right focus, avoid bias. Let's try that. Avoid. Anything else? Yeah. So we're reviewing it, reviewing a paper. So one thing you want to check is this, get the style. Get what?
All right, sorry. Yeah.
Let's finish your sentence.
I thought when you were
That's a question. Style and grammar, question mark. Anything else?
I sent the reviewers credible and like.
So technically correct. Okay. How about technically accurate? Well, I started correct, and I don't know where the eraser is. So, all right, I've got space for one more. Yeah. Yeah.
What the audience is. Is that the responsibility of?
So I'm going to try to generalize that question. So suitability of the article for the journal or the destination, right? How do I say that? Suitability. So you've got two questions. One is, what are the reviewer's responsibilities? And one of those responsibilities that you're curious about is the suitability of the journal, of the article for the journal. Is that right? Okay. So reviewer's responsibilities. Responsibilities. Okay, I don't have any space for more, and we don't have enough time. So this is useful for me because I forgot some of these, and now I have to go back and revise it. So next time. Let's see if this works. Uh-oh. We're not getting any.
Are you guys working on the...
I lost my screen. That means I have to tell a story while you set it up. So I originally wrote this, a paper called How to Review a Technical Paper, because I was editor of a journal for many years called Energy and Buildings. And I was spending a year in Japan, and I discovered something that the Japanese were very reluctant to review articles. And one of the reasons I discovered is because of status, that if you were doing this anonymously, you didn't know whether if you, a junior professor or a graduate student or something, was reviewing a senior professor's paper or what, because it was supposed to be anonymous. And they're very conscious of status, and they don't want to insult people and so on. And so they weren't sure what to say and how to say it. And then, of course, English was their second language, and they weren't very good. So the combination of that left them with made it very difficult for them to figure out how to write a technical review of a paper or a review of a paper. And so then I started giving some talks, and out of that came an article called How to Review a Technical Paper. And last night when I was doing some last-minute touches on this, I was talking to my wife, who, by coincidence, is writing writing some reviews for some papers, and I had sent her this article that I had actually written many years ago. And she is anybody familiar with the ACEEE summer study? So she was looking at the review instructions for that, because that was the conference for which she was reviewing papers. And they said, look at here are the review instructions, or instructions on how to review. And she said, these are yours. They copied you. Did you know that? And I said, oh yeah, I actually wrote that when I was chair of the conference 25 years ago. I put it in there, and they hadn't changed it any, except that a certain thing arrived in between. It's called the internet. And I wrote the original paper before the internet. And so you'll find when you read the paper, and I'll put it up, it talks about things like minimizing mailing costs, postage costs, something we just don't even think about anymore. It's really quaint, it's almost like sealing wax. Okay, so why is a review necessary? I think most of you can come up with your own ideas about why it's necessary, but I came up with 3 different roles, and one is is there some way, where's the person, this, I think we're going to have a lot of feedback with that thing. If it gets really annoying, tell me. There are lots of roles that the review takes. One of them is that technical approach and analysis and computation. These are the finding deficiencies in those. And that's really your technical aspects. But then there's also other kinds of reviews that you may be reviewing for patents or style or the grammar. And sometimes these issues become rise in importance and affect some of your ability to understand the technical approach and so on. So even though you might ask, well, are we responsible for the grammar and style? Generally, no. But if they are so bad that they rise to the level of affecting your ability to assess the technical approach or conclusions, then you say, that's a problem, and you just send it back. And the most important thing that should stop right on, and you've already discovered this, is before you go too far down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to review the paper, you should know when to decline. And it's perfectly legitimate to decline. I don't know about in my list of reasons, if you're just the 10th author and you don't think that you're competent, why didn't you think you were competent to review the article?
Well, I guess I said as a 10th author to show that my experience with in terms of publishing a paper was very minimal. I just contributed to a small part of a larger project. I wasn't very experienced in technical papers in general, and then also I was a new, I just had a bachelor's degree, and I was not an expert at all in the subject area. So I felt like I wasn't very familiar with what I was being asked to review.
So an editor will look at it in two ways. Sometimes they can squeeze the most free work out of you, and you will do the most careful review. On the other hand, you often lack the perspective and the context. That's what you're describing, and so that's so you might not be able to distinguish the forest from the trees, or however you want to call it. So from that perspective, sometimes editors really like to have postdocs or last year PhD students. They're kind of the ideal candidate because, like I say, they can often get the most time and attention out of them. But then they still may miss some of the big picture aspects. So some of the reasons that I came up for not reviewing a paper and declining is a conflict of interest. And I don't know how many times I've been asked to review a paper that I'm the co-author of, but it happens. The editor is a little, I don't know, out to lunch or something, and for some reason or another, they send a paper to me as one of the. I wasn't the first author, but I was maybe the fourth author or something. And that's a little bit embarrassing, and you can't do that. And you should probably be careful if the paper's from, if you happen to know that this paper is from your institution. It's often blind, but you might be able to recognize it immediately if it's really close to you. Obviously, if you don't know anything about the subject, that's a good reason right there. A typical message in response when you decline is that I haven't been working in this field for 15 years, and I'm just not up with the literature. Just tell the editor that. That's fair. And if you're too busy, tell the editor. They don't like to hear that, but they'd rather hear that immediately than waiting to the deadline, and then you say, I just couldn't get to it. So that's why I say right here, if you can't meet the deadline, just tell the editor right away, and just don't dither. Just so the editor can go out and find somebody else. And preferably, if you can tell the editor, oh, there's Dr. So-and-so who really knows this topic. Here's her email address. And the editor will love you. And this is just a tip. I'm not sure how true it is anymore, but I used to know when I was an editor, really before we had good databases, who the good reviewers were, and if they ever submitted a paper, they would get better service. I'd put their submission on the top of the pile, make sure that it got reviewed sooner, so they get better turnaround, and so on. So they remember in one way or another if you do good reviews, but if you fail them, they might remember that too. And in fact, the way most of these editorial databases are set up now, they know the exact number of days that you've been holding that review and not doing anything, and they'll send out a reminder and another reminder, and then finally they'll say, forget it. But they really don't like that. And so reviewers actually get scored just like Uber drivers or something like that. Yeah.
So what at a university, what's the
That's a good question. Anybody want to comment? Speculate?
Established as an expert.
Yeah.
Reputation goes.
But if you're an anonymous reviewer, not necessarily.
You're just saying how
To the editor.
have an
To the-
relationship
yeah.
with the editor.
But I think you have a more general question. And I guess the first part of it is reviewing a paper is kind of like doing some exercise. It's good training and keeps you in shape, keeps you sort of pushing the envelope. Because the paper will never be exactly the kind of work that you do. So it forces you to investigate or explore a little bit of an area that maybe you do have the training for, but you never considered. And so in that sense, it's just good for your academic health or your intellectual health. But and then you may be exposed to some new ideas that may be useful for your own profession. Beyond that,
The only reason
Yeah.
I ask is because I don't hear many
So a typical way a lot of the conferences work that we attend, there'll be conference papers that people present, and when you submit a paper, the first thing that will happen is the panel leader will send your paper out to all the other, or to several of the other participants in that panel or whatever it is, that group of papers, and ask them to review it. And that serves two purposes. One is to make they can be fairly the leader, which is in effect the editor in this case, has the opportunity, has a lot of leverage over you because, hey, if you don't review their paper, why should anybody review yours? And so you feel a little guilty. But then the second part is that you get to learn about what the other authors and presenters are going to cover, and that helps you and understands better the context. So that's a different kind of review, but it does happen. Did that answer your question, Ellen? But yeah.
I have the paper that we're going to submit to a journal.
That's a really good question because there are a lot of, I hate to use the word, but fake journals out there. And some of them, and there's a range of dubiousness, of quality of the journals. And even the most respectable authors get fooled or tricked to think that this is a journal that they should A, submit an article to, and B, review for. That's such a good question. I'm going to, don't forget it, because I think it deserves an entire 15 minutes of discussion about how do you recognize a fake journal, and how do you decide which journals you should accept reviews, solicitations for reviews from, and so on. So I'm going to avoid answering that one, just because I'm not prepared, and yet I know it's really important.
Okay, well, I was just going to say that I didn't know. But and that's as far as I
Yeah, there are a few rankings now of the quality of the journals and how many of them are just scams. But I don't want to cover that now. In fact, I don't think we're going to cover even half of this. So already we've described several different kinds of journals, of reviews that occur. The one that's the classic is the journal, the peer-reviewed, anonymous kind of review. And that's where you submit an article to a journal. They strip all names and affiliations from it, so it should be anonymous, and then they send it out to reviewers. And the reviewers will be chosen by the editor. Now, there are many other kinds of reviews. I described what happens in many conferences where where a panel leader or the conference chair will be responsible for getting the proposed papers and then the papers and then sending them out to review, typically to other participants in the conference or outside, and they may or may not be blind. It just depends. And then there are all these other kinds of reviews, which I don't really know what to call them. So there's a friendly review, which is on the opposite side, where you as a journal as an author want to send it to your friends or colleagues or even strangers and say, I'd be grateful if you could look at this and give me some comments. So it's you know the reviewer, and the reviewer knows you. And that's a very different relationship. And so it takes a different kind of construction of a review. And many institutions have something called an internal review, and that internal review is a way of maintaining quality control, or simply controlling the papers that come out before Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory allows you to get a report number for an LBNL report. It must pass some sort of internal review, and many institutions have different levels. And I'm not sure whether ITS has that here. I don't think so, but many research centers will require somebody to at least review the article before it goes out, because they don't want to embarrass the institution. Did I forget anything? There are these hybrids and mutants in between, so these anonymous, peer-reviewed, and friendly. And each situation is slightly different. Let's see. Okay. Now, what does a technical review look like? It used to have, way back when I wrote this, the original paper about this, it had 4 parts. And those are the 4 parts I put here. It has a referee's review form, there are additional comments, the original paper with the edits and comments, and then finally some sort of cover letter to the editor. But that's virtually, It's so 20th century. It's used less and less because most of the reviews now are done on the web. Has anybody done a web review? I can't remember. Who's done a technical review at all? Have reviewed a paper at all here? John, you have. Are you the only one? You haven't. Anybody else? Nobody? Okay, good. So what will happen is you're going to be asked you'll get an email. This is what will happen. You'll get an email from some journal, let's call it the Journal of Energy Studies. And they will say, "Dear Mr. Ms. So-and-so, we would be grateful if you could review the following article." And then it will ask you, do you agree? Maybe it'll give you the abstract, and you can look at it right there and make a decision. It'll say yes, or you can say yes or no. Or they'll give you a link, and you can look at the whole article and make a decision. And then once you agree to, then you'll have access to maybe downloading the article, and also there'll be a web-based form where you can put all sorts of information. So that will all be on this some sort of web-based form. And usually there'll be 2 parts or a few parts of that form. Some will be yes, no. Some will be 1 to 5 about the quality of everything from the technical presentation, the graphs, the quality of the English, and is the abstract present? Is the abstract succinct and describes the work? It'll just have a list of questions. You'll tick them all, yes, 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 or quality 1 through 5 or something like that. And then there's usually a place for your open comments where you can. This will be to the authors saying. Where you say, I didn't understand this paragraph, or this argument doesn't make sense, or you can delete the first page and this paper will be 5 times better, or something like that. And then there's another part which is usually comments to the editor. And those are private and not given to the author. And that's actually more entertaining. Because it's more challenging, because there you can really say things like, here's one. I think I actually have seen this. I was astonished that the author wasn't aware of this. Identical research done 15 years ago. And basically, you might decide you wanted to be a little more gentle with the author, but you wanted the editor to know that this paper was really just not appropriate or in some way defective. Be careful. Make sure you get the right comments in the right place. You might not want to don't put those private comments in the part for the author. It's a little embarrassing. I've seen that happen several times. Another thing that I just want to warn you about is there's many websites and journals allow you to download the paper, maybe in Microsoft Word or something like that, and then you can do track changes, which is a very nice way. It's a very efficient way of making comments, so you don't have to say on page 14, line 17. You can just do the track comments. It's very easy. You've probably done that with papers yourself. And the difficulty is, have you ever looked at what does that track comment look like? It has your initials, or maybe your name on it, or maybe your institution. And so you need to figure out a way to scrub that before you upload it. And furthermore, if you send them a Word document, you also need to go into the properties of the document and make sure that your name isn't listed as the owner of that document. And I confess, I've occasionally gone in when reviewers forgot to do these things and checked and found out who the reviewer was. and you would too, I think. So make sure that you figure out how to scrub it. Do you know how to scrub it? Yeah, that would be the first place you look, is how to scrub, or I wouldn't use scrub, I'd probably say how to remove the comments. But you go into the properties of the document in Microsoft Word and editing, and there's a place where you put initials, and you can get rid of that. And then for file information properties, you go into that, and you can make sure that you're no longer the owner of that document or the creator. Get your name out of it completely. So, since there's such a range in types of reviews, there's also situations where there won't be forms or any kind of guidance. You're being just asked to give a review. So here's some ideas and suggestions I have for organizing a review of the paper. You better make sure that you get the author, the title of the paper, and the author on that piece of paper. You don't have to put your name on it. In fact, you probably shouldn't. You might want to keep that separate. But put the title and the author's name. And then I always find it useful to get this kind of a summary of the paper. See if you can just write what this paper is about in 1 or 2 sentences. Sometimes the authors aren't able to do that, but if you can, it demonstrates your mastery of the subject. I also find it very useful to start with a paragraph that says positive things about the paper. Imagine you're the author, and you receive this review, and the first sentence of the review says, "This paper sucks." Probably it won't be you won't be very open to any comments that follow after that. So I suggest you say that you start with some. If it's sometimes painful to come up with some description that says this is an admirable exploration of an area that actually hasn't been documented in the past, and you can come up with ways of at least finding some positive aspects of the paper before you go into the negative points. In other cases, the paper may be excellent, and so you don't even have to. It's not an effort to come up with something good, but it's always useful to start with something positive. Okay, so that's the good things. Just one paragraph or a couple sentences, and then you get to the major comments about the author's assumptions, the technical approach. This is actually the first place where you really say something that reflects your knowledge of the subject. And so obviously you can start with the context, the assumptions. Is the technical approach, the methodology, is the analysis correct? And obviously, if they start making mistakes, like saying this is where you identify technical errors, such as not the 5 + 3 = 12 kind of error, if they make that, or they're using the wrong models or the wrong formulas.
I'm wondering,
Yeah.
so as far as the models and formulas go, I feel like a lot of papers like that. Like, how would you go about verifying models? Let's say if you're not too familiar at that point, do you say, you know what, I shouldn't be reviewing this, or I mean, that's a base of knowledge of what these models are in the first place to be able to.
And there's no simple answer to that question, because oftentimes you can't, based on the data, the information presented in the paper, either understand everything or have enough information to know what the correct answer is. Very often what you do is you look at the conclusions or intermediate results and say, that doesn't seem right. And this is the difference between having a sort of an undergraduate reviewing the paper and somebody who's got 15 years in the field. They go right to the end, they say, this smells. There's something wrong. Now I got to go backwards and figure out what's happening. And again, you might not understand every aspect of the model, and generally, I think it's fair to say, and fair to write, I did not review every aspect of these formulas. You can just say that, but the conclusions seem to make sense. But on the other hand, if those are crucial to the paper's outcome, then you better make sure you understand what they did. So it's a gray area about how detailed. If this is a paper on mathematics, and this is they're trying to prove a hypothesis, and you don't understand that formula, the process at which they went through, then you should excuse yourself. But sometimes, if it's certain small aspects of a model, in fact, where the details of the model aren't so as important as the overall conclusions, you can skate around that. So then you've got those minor comments, like everything from style, and as I said earlier, this is where if the English is so bad, they escalate from minor comments to major comments, and may say you may need to decide that you can't understand what the authors were trying to say, and therefore reject the paper. Sometimes people want to know, how do we write these comments? And in this, especially in these minor comments, just put bullet forms, because sort of a bulleted list. Because if I'm an author, what I do is I'm going to take all these comments that you make, I'm going to put it in a matrix. And that matrix will, on each side, will have the reviewer's comments, and then the next column next to it will be how I responded to that comment. So I can show you one, I think. Just a moment. That means I have to find it. I might be able to find it. Nope, not there. Just a moment. This is one of the most important tricks, not as a reviewer, but then as the author responding to the reviews. Excuse me, let me see if I can find it. I believe. No, I'll have to look for that. I'm sorry, I can't find it right off. So, what you do is, does this flip over? I don't trust it. So once again, you're going to take all those minor comments and major comments, put them in a list form, and make that a column of a table. And just a moment, I'm going to write that down for myself so I remember. And then on the left side are the reviewer's comments, and on the right side is how you address them, because you're going to revise the paper, and the editor wants to see what you've done and that you've paid attention to it. And if an editor can see how you ticked off and you did every one of the comments, you responded to every one of the comments, the editor is likely to say, oh, that I can see that she responded to every one of the comments and in a serious way addressed them, and I'm not going to send it out for review again. And you've just saved yourself maybe 6 months in publication time. That took me about 10 years to learn. All right, so then finally, you've got to make a recommendation about whether to publish it. And this is really important because sometimes I've seen reviewers who will just write comments that just destroy the paper, or at least on the surface seem to say, this paper should never have even been published. It looks like garbage. And then you get to the recommendations, And the reviewer says, "Oh, I think this paper should be published with small changes, small revisions." And I would have never realized that if I just looked at all the major and minor comments. So you've got to make sure that the editor knows what you as the reviewer overall believe about the paper. Okay. Well, I've never had it, but I can tell you my wife just had a paper that she got, which I think the editor would have accepted as is. Although the reviewers had some comments, but they were so small that, and more about when you write the next paper, this is what you should include. And I think she could get away with it, but I'm sorry, I'm not that careful, or something, or my papers engender more criticism. Okay, so this is the toughest part. You know, what makes a good paper? This is the technical part. So far, all I've done is talk about procedure, and this is the part that I can't help you with, because it depends upon your specialization and also where was the we didn't actually keep that question about reviewer's responsibility, but in a sense, I guess this is one reviewer is responsible. But what is a good paper for one journal or conference may be wrong for another one. So a very common comment I will see in a journal submission is for the reviewer will say, this would be an excellent paper for a conference proceedings, but not for a journal article. And that's damning it with faint praise, but it may be correct. And that's something that somebody with a little bit more perspective can give on an article. But in general, a good paper contains something of merit. So take the paper, sort of stand back and ask yourself, what did I learn? What's new? Is there a new contribution in it for this paper? And if you can't identify that, then you might want to start adjusting your comments to reflect that fact that if there's nothing of merit in there, why are we wasting our time? But sometimes there is merit in the paper, but you can't. But a reader, not a reviewer, a reader under normal circumstances won't find it because the paper is so poorly organized. And you as a reviewer should try to identify those situations and say, yes, there's something really important in that paper. However, it's buried under all sorts of other garbage. And it will take major revision in order to extract that and give it the proper significance, attention. But you've probably seen this before, a structure of the paper with an abstract, introduction, body, and conclusions and references. And I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. An abstract, we talked about an abstract last week, about what makes a good abstract. But it's worth coming back to it. Oh, I just lost my page here, excuse me. When you write a paper, for example, for a conference, what you often will do is you will submit an abstract, and on the basis of the abstract, you will get a thumbs up or thumbs down. They'll tell you, okay, go ahead, write the full paper. You write the full paper. Somehow that original abstract stays with the paper. You never get around to changing it. And then when the reviewer looks at the paper and abstract, they realize, hey, wait a moment, this abstract isn't at all connected to the paper. Or it's faintly connected. Or maybe it even contradicts what you said. Or it contains material that wasn't actually in the paper. Because if you remember, sometimes you're writing that abstract as a kind of a marketing tool to make sure that people will, the conference will accept the paper in the first place. So, but when you actually get down to writing the paper, it's not actually following what you promised. And so you get this mismatch between what's in the abstract and what's in the body of the paper. And you got to go back. Authors often forget to revise the abstract. So, and this causes one of the curious problems about information not presented elsewhere in the paper. Oftentimes, if there are multiple authors, one of the authors will end up writing the abstract and another the whole paper. And there's some information that is in the abstract that's not in the paper. And that's a no-no. Then, in terms of the introduction, you're trying to set the context for why is this topic important, and this is, I guess, one of my minor peeves that you'll find in the introductions are often too long and maybe even self-serving, and as depending on the area of the discipline, I've often found that you can remove the first page of a paper and it'll actually improve the whole thing. And so I often look for the real topic sentence, especially if it's a magazine article, a draft. You'll find that the article is really begins one page further down as the authors struggle to figure out what they're really writing about. And this is a warning flag if the author cites only his or her papers in the introduction. Then the body of the paper has this is again where these are, I think, fairly common sense questions. Once you see you're trying to present the author's trying to present information, do they successfully convey that information? And here, this is, again, where you need some perspective. Look for the material that could be deleted. Maybe there's whole distractions going on. Because remember, sometimes papers are compromises of several authors or co-authors. And so one of the co-authors is in love with a certain section, but in the end, after the paper's gone through many revisions, that section just doesn't fit in there. But somehow it has stayed in there because of that co-author. You, as the reviewer, can say, this paper would look much better if you remove section C. And then this is one of the hardest things to capture is examining the paper in a larger context as a whole. Is the paper big enough for a whole article? Or does it deserve, is there enough information and new material for a whole article? Or is it too big? So what's the right size? And so you can say things like, this is really 2 papers, split it up. Or they don't want to hear it, but saying this is really not enough information for a paper. And this is where they will say, this would be a great conference paper, not a journal article. Charts, tables. This is an area now that's so easy to make to do poorly because we can. I guess I'm going to go right over to my major objection. Thanks to Excel, you're going to have these problems where people will be printing and displaying numbers with 7 significant digits. But if you go through the paper, you'll realize that only the first 2 are significant, and all the rest just distract the reader. And so you can just tell them, hey, just suppress those insignificant digits. And also suppress zeros. So go from, instead of kilometers, use centimeters here and get rid of all those zeros. It's so much easier for the reader. But a more difficult question is to decide if there's some data that you want to, and you want to convey information from that data, do you put it in a table or do you put it in in a chart. And there's some excellent books by Tufte about the visual display of information. Has anybody seen that? I'll bring it in one of these times so you can see it. And he just talks about what's the right amount of information to put in a chart, how to present it elegantly to convey. Let me backtrack. What's the right amount of data to put in a chart or a table in order to most effectively convey whatever information you want? Okay, so we've got conclusions and references. This is a kind of a surprising area for the conclusions. Again, sometimes you have a problem that people try to introduce or sneak in extra information into the conclusions that was not introduced in the rest of the paper. Maybe they stole, they're borrowing information from another paper or something like that. That really shouldn't be in there. The conclusions should not contain any new information. It should be, what they discuss should be built upon what was in the body of the paper. And maybe in the introduction to discuss what might have been in the literature. And a few times I see the situation where authors will, in their introduction, pose questions. And then they forget to answer them in the conclusions. So if you decide you're going to pose questions in the introduction, which is I think a good way of focusing and targeting what the paper is about, then you better make sure you've answered those questions in the conclusions. So beyond that, I guess there are the references, and somebody asked about references here. Your job here is not to, your job is to review the references to see if they make sense, because very often people now are using, well, let me ask, what kind of reference citation index are you using? Does anybody have one? What? You use Mendeley?
Yeah, Mendeley, yeah.
EndNote? I use Zotero, but it's just the same as Mendeley. And you have to be careful because sometimes the references don't print correctly when you switch to the right, whatever format they want. So it's worth just scanning them, but then also to start looking at the references themselves to see, is the author actually citing the right papers? Because you may know one or two of the classic papers or something that covers that. So sometimes, almost as a courtesy in the introduction, the author cites a few of the iconic papers, yes. And you can expect that. That's a good way for the author to flag the fact that, yes, they did the literature research.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like if you're not referencing the main ones,
That's the context setting, yeah. You might also, but again, I always am suspicious if the author is only citing his or her own papers, or even if half of the papers are to the author. That's too many. It's suspicious. It's not wrong, but it just makes you wonder. Yeah.
Is there also just such thing as like too many references?
If there are that many references, then one or two things could happen. First of all, you start asking, if there's so many references like that, it's probably a review paper. And then the author could easily dispose of that problem by saying, Jane Blow has reviewed all the literature on this topic. And then you cite Blow et al. So that's one way. I don't know. Sometimes there's a page limit, so you do have to balance those two features. Yeah.
I imagine this might change depending on the topic and how application is and whatnot. Authors citing themselves with that institution.
That's
So it's not
that's
for
sus-
the author.
yeah, that can be suspicious too. And it goes the other way. You could say, I'm astonished that the author didn't cite any papers from, the Fermilab research activities because that covered it, or ITS and Davis who's done 25 papers on bicycling or something like that. Okay, I think we're almost there. These are the topics that I haven't dealt with because I don't know enough, and now I'm going to add some more. One is plagiarism. It's an increasing problem that you need to decide if this paper has been plagiarized, or more likely, has this paper been presented in essentially the same form somewhere else, and what are the ethical constraints upon that. And I guess I'm not ready to talk about that yet. I should, but as a reviewer, if you know that paper's been presented elsewhere in an almost identical form, your job is to call that out to the editor and let the editor decide. So I should add that. Just thank you for reminding me. So, and then I guess I just want to remind you that when you do an anonymous review, if it's truly anonymous, you better make sure that you leave no electronic fingerprints, which are pretty easy to do. Okay, I'm sorry, we went over time, but any other questions? I guess I'll try to answer these. Let me take a picture of those. I don't know how I'll answer them, but we'll get back to them. Let's put it that way. Just some other. Just a moment.
How frequently do you like a back and forth on reviews?
What do you mean?
Or like the reviewer leaves comments, the author responds to those comments. Does the reviewer ever get a chance to like?
Absolutely. The editor will often just take your comments and send them to the reviewer, send them to the author. The author will revise the paper, and that's why this matrix that I was describing is so important, because then the reviewer will have forgotten in the last 6 months what he or she said, looked at it, and can see, oh yeah, now I remember what I said, and oh yeah, the author reviewed it fine. Or they'll go back and forth 3 or 4 times, and it's excruciating. It depends upon the journal, it depends upon the authors and the reviewers.
So it just depends on the situation, how often that kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
How many papers
That's a good question. I don't know, but I think at a minimum, a paper should be reviewed by 3 people. That's a rule of thumb, which means that for every paper you write, you probably should also review 3 papers. So if you're at 3 papers a year, or if you get there, you start thinking about it. And that comes back to your question, right? About, how to be time efficient and these are major investments, but you should treat them then as a learning experience, as a way, kind of an intellectual exercise. But still, they take time, and you've got to prioritize a little bit. And I don't have any guidance for that. It may be part of your list of accomplishments. You always keep a list of all the papers you reviewed, because when people ask you at the end of the year for if you have performance appraisals or whatever, they ask, what have you done? You want to be able to say, I reviewed X number of papers, and here's a list.
It's a good tip generally.
Yes.
Keep track of what you do.
Yeah.
Tally it all up.
Okay.